Let's get more now on our main story this evening, and 3 men have been arrested in mid-Wales and Yorkshire on suspicion of offences under the Fraud Act in connection with the selling of horse meat labelled as beef.
A processing plant in the south of France whose meat ended up on the shelves of Tesco and Aldi, as well as in some Findus products, has been accused by the French government today of knowingly selling horse meat labelled as beef.
Meanwhile, there are fears that the horse painkiller Bute may have entered the food chain after tests on 8 horses slaughtered in Britain proved positive. Here's our medical correspondent, Fergus Walsh.
Consumers deceived and regulations breached. The horse meat scandal deepens every day. 6 horses slaughtered recently at this abattoir in Somerset were contaminated with the drug Bute and may have entered the food chain in France. The company and vets partly blame the horse passport system, meant to ensure animals are fit to eat.
I think we have to take a look at the passport system. There are problems in as much as there are a number of organisations that issue horse passports. We've also in the past called for microchipping of all horses so you can link the identity of the horse to the passport, so it makes it a very secure system.
In future, all horses sent for export will be required to have a negative Bute test. So what is phenylbutazone or Bute? It's an equine painkiller. It's also used to treat severe arthritis in humans. Serious side effects are rare. So how much Bute is in the contaminated horse meat? Well, health officials say you'd need to eat 500 to 600 horse meat burgers to get a single dose of the drug.
The chief medical officer said no processed foods containing horse meat had tested positive for Bute in the UK. But if that happened, it would not be a threat.
If phenylbutazone has got into the diet through horse meat, then the level will be so low it is very unlikely to impact on human health. So human health, please don't worry. Yuck factor is another matter, and whether there are criminal issues is a third.
Food scares are nothing new. In 1948, Britons were shocked to discover that black market profiteers had been passing off horse meat as beef.
Public feeling grows against a sinister trade.
Tomorrow, food retailers will reveal the results of yet more tests on processed beef products, and consumers will find out if any more have been contaminated with horse meat. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Well, let's get more on this now, because we can speak to Roger Young, who's Managing Director of Longhand Isotopes, a company that works to identify where food comes from, and he joins us live from our Leeds studio. Mr. Young, a very good evening to you. I imagine companies like you could be awfully busy now in the next few weeks and months, because it raises all sorts of questions, this, about what is in our food and where it does come from.
Indeed, the phones are starting to ring quite hard. I think the issue of exactly where this goes is going to take a bit of time to sort, because there's a lot of fallout that's going to happen in the next few days, and I think it's going to be a while before the clarity of what needs to be done will be obvious to everybody.
What's your take on why we're here? What regulations aren't working and what testing processes aren't working?
The issue is really very clear. There are a very large set of regulations to do with food safety and food traceability. But what they look at, those regulations, are the processes by which meat and all food arrives at our plate. They don't look at the products themselves. So these frauds have happened because people have noticed that the product themselves are not tested very much, but the paperwork is. So as long as the paperwork says it's beef, then it's getting through, and that's more or less what's happened.
And why aren't the products tested more? Because that will surprise a lot of people who will expect their food to be examined quite carefully. Well,
you've got to realise that the traceability and the regulations that we currently have are relatively new. They come out of the problems with salmonella and BSE and foot and mouth in the early 90s. At a time, or before that time, there was no paperwork really to speak of at all, no farm assurance. So we're in a position now where we have some farm assurance, which is better than nothing. And the curious thing is, even if the assurance schemes are done very well, and a lot of them are, And people like the British Retail Consortium are making very correct statements that the delivery of those assurance schemes, and don't forget there's just not one, there's many of them, there's the assurance schemes of farms, also at the processing unit, all the way to the distribution, all the way to retail. There's a whole series of linked assurance schemes. They can be delivered extremely well. But if you don't actually look at the product that's going through the supply chain, you can miss something, and something can get under the radar. In this case, what's happened, it's got under the radar on a very big scale.
Do you think that the EU regulations, in a way, have almost not helped because it's opened up the market and made the supply chains even longer and more difficult to track?
No, in a way, that's a different issue. The world is entitled to have complex supply chains. We drink coffee that comes a long way. We like to have exotic foods that come a long way. And I don't think the market should be told what it can and can't do in terms of complexity. But like many things in society, what we should do is to say, well, if we have complexity, let's properly regulate it. And that's really what we want here.
OK, Roger Young from Leeds, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.